Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl Buckwalter. Thank you for joining us today for a guide to rainwater catchment and storage. I am a residential landscape irrigation designer, consultant, and educator. I have been a landscape designer since 2004. And throughout my career, as well as during my education, I was always focused on water efficient landscaping, using the right plants and so forth. So I am excited to be able to talk with you today about how to catch and store rainwater. Our topics today include the principles of the watershed approach to landscaping, why capture, also called harvest, rainwater, healthy soil, which is the foundation of our landscapes, and strategies to slow, spread, sink, and store rainwater. You will have a handout with numerous resources, including the ones in this presentation, and the Citrus Heights Water District will be sharing the recording on their YouTube. I just want to mention, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner here, river-friendly landscaping. There's a lot of friendlies, Russian-friendly landscaping and so forth, as well as Rescape California, the Green Gardens Group in Southern California, and the watershed approach kind of brings it all together. We collaborate, we share the same principles and practices. And so I just say that to clarify so nobody's confused about why am I seeing river-friendly landscaping and why is it the watershed approach? The watershed approach helps us really narrow it down to these four areas. We want to select local, native, and climate appropriate plants. A wonderful resource for you is the California Native Plant Society's website called calscape.org on your resource list. And you can enter in your zip code and you'll receive a list of all the plants that are suitable to your area. Also, group plants by water needs, called hydrozoning. So if you have a list of plants that are all low water use plants, you want to group those together and have them watered by the same irrigation valve. When you have moderate water plants, for example, you want those grouped together. Another important factor, though, is the sun. So if you have low water use plants that love full sun, they need to be together. If you have low water use plants that like part shade, those plants need to be together. It will make your gardening life so much easier. The third principle is design and install high efficiency irrigation equipment. And it is wonderful that we have such cutting edge technology these days. And the Citrus Heights Water District has rebates and incentives. They also have free WaterWise house calls. So I encourage you to check into that further at their website. And then today's major topic is capture and use rainwater as a resource. First of all, what is a watershed? So it's an area of land, as you can see, where all the water under it or on it drains into a water body. So if we think about a mountain and we think of water going down one side of the mountain, rainwater or snow, and then we have the water going down the other side of the mountain, those are two different watersheds. And oftentimes watersheds are named after the body of water in which they flow. So, we have a watershed that flows into the Sacramento River. Watersheds can also flow into Lake Tahoe, for example. And there are small to large scale watersheds. So think of your home, as I think of mine, as a mini watershed. You can capture, store, and use rainwater as a resource as well. In the upper right-hand corner is our two books written by Brad Lancaster, Rainwater Harvesting, and he refers to waste versus abundance when it comes to watersheds. And as you can see in the first one, dehydrated site. So what does that mean? The rain and the runoff drains away from the property and into storm drains, ultimately rivers and so forth. And with that rainwater takes toxins and pollutants right into the stormwater because they're not treated. So if you look at the upper image, the water hits the roof, it goes right down into the landscape, onto the hardscape, such as the driveway, and just takes all those contaminants with it, okay? Whereas a hydrated site, we want that rainwater captured in storage or soaking into the ground. And so as you can see on the roof, the water comes off into a downspout, goes into a rain barrel, at least this one downspout, and then it flows into landscaped areas. So around trees and shrubs, and directed to those areas where it can soak in, not hitting hardscape where it goes into the gutters. So why harvest rain? I first want to say, why not? But we've just talked about the top 3 bullet points. But look at the 4th one. Rain is free. It's free of charge, high quality water. And it's a natural fertilizer in that it has minerals and beneficial microorganisms, nitrogen, and so forth in it. And when we think of rainwater, it can be passive or it can take energy. So if it's passive, for example, it might use gravity to flow, to have that water flow. And if that's the case, then you're definitely going to be able to reduce your energy costs and use. And I think of rainwater as also a wonderful backup plan and actual first line of defense in many cases. If you have a well and there's not enough water coming from it, or municipal water has a problem, what about times of drought and times when we're told we need to just water 1 day a week or 2 days a week or something like that? Then you have water stored up to help your plants and trees, your landscape as a whole, get through those times. So just to show how much rainfall you can capture, think of this example, if you would. This is from one rain event. So if you have a roof area square footage divided by the number of downspouts, so say we have 4 downspouts, we're going to multiply that times 0.62, which is a constant that converts the square foot inches into gallons, okay? And then that yields the gallons of water per inch of rain per downspout. So to give some real numbers here, we have 1 inch of rain times 731 square feet from that roof going to that downspout times the constant of 0.62. That yields 453 gallons of rainwater per downspout. Okay? So next, I said in the beginning that soil is the foundation of our landscapes. We need to know what soil type we have. It's also referred to as texture. So there's sand, silt, and clay, and those are the 3 particles that make up the soil types in different and varying percentages. Sand will feel coarse, just like at the beach, right? Silt will feel silky when it's wet, and then clay feels sticky when it's wet. And so when we think of what soil texture do we have, next comes the structure. And the structure is the arrangement of the sand, silt, and clay. And what happens is that it binds together, making what's called aggregates. And so with those aggregates, there's now created pore spaces where air and water can move in and through and around those aggregates, in and through our soil. And so that's really important for healthy plants, healthy soil. You might realize that when there's compaction that takes place, for example, if we're working in our yard when it's just rained and the soil is saturated, our footsteps are going to be compressing that soil. And so we're going to be reducing or eliminating the pore spaces for the air and water. And knowing your soil type and understanding about the pore spaces and what arrangement these particles are taking, it's really critical to figure out how you're going to irrigate, how to make your plant choices, and how to capture rainwater. And we might think that our soil, because I say it and I hear it, oh, I have clay soil. Well, no soil is one thing or another. It's going to be percentages of that sand, silt, and clay. And so a clay soil has a lot of the clay in it, but it will have percentages of the other elements, okay? The other sand, silt, etc. So look at this for just a moment, if you would. The the image on the left here that's showing sandy soil. Look how that water just flows down, and it will go pretty quickly, but it flows down into the soil profile in a narrow column. Whereas clayey type soils, they will soak in more slowly and go out, spread out broadly, and take longer to soak into the ground as well. As you can see on the left, it took 24 hours to get down to 72 inches with sandy soil, and it took 48 hours for the clayey soil to do this. So how do we create and maintain healthy living soils? Organic matter is super, super important. Compost and mulch and even worm castings, they organically feed the soil organisms and they provide additional soil biology. And that structure that we were just talking, it will help to improve that structure, increasing the pore spaces for water and air. We do want to, just like we want to reduce compaction, we want to reduce tilling as well. It used to be popular to till our soil in our gardens every spring or something like that, regularly, basically. But research has since shown that it actually damages and can destroy our soil structure. So we don't want to do that. And that would be along with a lot of the wonderful living microorganisms and worms and so forth that are there. And then over time of doing this, your soil can become like a nutrient-rich sponge, sort of like a water reservoir or a bank of water that supports this healthy root growth. And to do this, though, as it says in the middle, just spread about a ½ inch of compost within the canopy of a plant or tree, or just a little bit beyond. And that canopy or drip line is where the branches and the stems are and the leaves. And so that's the drip line. And then we spread it a little bit beyond. We'll moisten it with some water and then cover it up with mulch. And that's it. You will get the soil life started. For a moment, I'd like to talk about today's garden reality, how it is a balancing act for our gardens and for creatures. It's not a matter of if, but when we are going to experience, once again, drought, water shortages, storm events that are stronger than usual, last longer, fires. I call these extreme weather whiplash. And so there are things that we can do and that we'll learn about today that will help our landscapes become more resilient to these conditions. I also want to share that I think of this as kind of an opportunity for us because, these conditions didn't start immediately, but we are experiencing them. So this is a time when we can look at our landscapes and we can say, what can we do to help them become resilient to these conditions? Improving soil health, having the right plants, capturing and storing rainwater, and so forth. We are setting up our landscapes for success. And honestly, with me, I feel like it's a good backup plan also because I know that I have that water stored that I can use when I need to. So the first thing we're going to talk about here for capturing and storing rainwater is to slow it. Slow it, spread it, sink it, store it. We'll go through each of these, but let's start with slow it. So we want to keep water in the landscape, yes, but on the left, this is just an example where a downspout is being directed across the landscape, and then it'll go out into the gutter. And so, of course, we don't want that. On the right, while we have a water efficient nozzle, rotary type nozzle that's in a sprinkler head, it's leaning and the water is not spraying its target, the lawn, it's spraying the sidewalk. So what do we want to do instead? Direct that rainwater. On the left, you see there's the roof, downspout that then pours onto this cobble, this stream bed or cobble bed, creek bed. Various terms are used for them. And the same is the case for the one in the middle, where there's the creek bed with the plants around it. And that's to show you that you can have plants around it. You can have plants planted in the creek bed, you just want to select plants that can manage periods of inundation of rain, so more moisture, or conditions of less rain. And the cobble plays a very important role. And then when that water comes down and the flow and the force of that rainwater comes down, it hits the cobbles, and that helps to break up the force and slow the flow of that water, that rainwater, giving it a chance to soak in more along the way. A very simple thing to do, a rain chain, as you can see on the right. So it comes from the downspout, it's connected there, comes down, goes into this little fish thing here that it collects in for a little while, and then it drains on out into the this permeable patio here with some recycled concrete surrounded by pebbles or gravel. Downspouts and creek beds continue here with some maintenance tips, because we have to care for everything in our landscape. There is no such thing as a no maintenance landscape. But we can reduce it, okay? So you want to inspect, repair, and keep rain gutters clear, remove leaf buildup and debris, and redistribute mulch. So, for example, if you get a strong storm weather event, mulch might have moved down into the creek bed. So you want to move that back out where it belongs, and then keep an entry and exit clear. So I will talk about that in a little while when we talk about rain gardens. I also want to point out that these creek beds can be fairly easy to construct. For example, you dig out just a shallow amount of sand, maybe 4 or 5 inches or so. So you dig out some soil there and you put it on the side of the creek bed called berms, and you can spread it on out into your landscaping. So it's simple to do that. It can take more, as you'll see in a minute. It can be super easy, or it could be more involved. Spread it. That's where we'll talk about this. So this is a landscape. It used to be lawn. And it's actually a well site. And since it's in a community, the well site was put into this building, and they wanted to have landscaping so it fits in a little bit better, right? It would look much more attractive. So this 3,683 square foot landscape consumes over 110,000 gallons of water per year. That's a lot of water. So what we did is in the upper left-hand picture, we created an area where there's going to be a rain garden. So soil was excavated out and moved off to the sides. And then there's a spillway, if you will, or an exit or the outflow even, where it comes out. So up in the far left, there's a downspout, I should say, that flows into that area. So now when there's water in the rain garden, it can flow out to that next layer of soil that's in the middle there. So that has created a swale, and it's not really much different from a creek bed. And I call it, we're just contouring, we're shaping the soil. So what we wanted to do here is to keep the water from running off. That swale goes across the property. So when it comes out of the rain garden, it goes there and spreads out even further. It could go down to another level with another swale, okay? The picture on the right bottom, that's the rain garden in action, basically. And what you are seeing with all this tubing, it's called inline drip tubing. So there's tubing that has emitters built right into it, every 12, 18, 24 inches, for example. So those emitters are right there. And they're great because rather than having an individual emitter that has like a 1/4 inch tubing called spaghetti tubing coming off of this, those can come off easily, get tripped on and so forth. So that eliminates some of the work in our landscape by using this sort of tubing. You will this is set up in a grid because this is an area that has a lot of plants in it. So we refer to that as densely planted. So we want all that soil to be moist. We also pin down the tubing and cover it with mulch so you're not tripping and catching on it. Now, you might say, why do I want to water all of that? I only have this one little area to water. If that's the case, put that drip tubing there, and then you'll have an area that's blank tubing that leads to another area where you might put more drip tubing in. So here you can see on the bottom left, there's some tubing. We're now covering it with this compost. We're covering it with mulch, and we've been planting the plants here. And this is the mature landscape. So now it uses 25,000 gallons of water per year, which still is a lot, but it's significantly lower than 110,000 gallons of water per year. So next, let's sink it. Let's sink that water. Here is where we'll talk about rain gardens. This is an excellent rain garden handbook. And while, yes, it is from the state of Washington, the principles are the same. What you'll be considering is what is your specific soil type, what types of plants are suitable for your climate and conditions, and use this knowledge from this handbook to create your rain gardens. So on your list of resources, you will have other resources for rain gardens and so forth, okay? Here's our anatomy of a rain garden. On the left, the inflow of the water. So the downspout could be coming there or a creek bed. And so you can see that squiggly line coming in, and it's going into the rain garden. And the rain garden's maybe 6 or 8 inches deep. And as it fills, if it's a heavy rain event, for example, as it fills, the water then with the squiggly line on the right side, that is the overflow that I was saying with that other project where it flows down into a swale that goes across the landscape. At the bottom, it says here rain garden soil mix. That may or may not be necessary for you and your soil. So your soil texture is really going to help with that to a great extent. And so using these resources and that handbook will help you determine whether you need to amend the soil. And you would put mulch down in the bottom. And what I do also is I will install some of that inline drip line, because if we have an unusually dry winter, those plants that are in and around the rain garden expect to see or expect to have rain in the winter. That helps them get through our dry summer months, of course, usually with some supplemental irrigation. But it's really important that if that's the case, we want to be able to irrigate those plants until we get a great rain event. And then we can stop irrigating once that season really starts. Here's an example of a rain garden in action also. So there is a tube, a drain tube that is going over to the area on the left, and you can see where the water is ponding there. And then there's a little on the right-hand side, there's a little area that goes down like that, and that's where the outflow is. On the right-hand side, this is the same rain garden in the summer, but you can't even tell that it's a rain garden, that it's a depression in the soil, and that's all it is. So let's talk about how to keep some of this water on our property using hardscape. Hardscape is generally defined as any hard material that does not consume water. So look at the upper right image, and we see concrete, concrete, concrete. Rainwater is going to hit that, go into the gutters, the street, the storm drain systems, taking all those contaminants, oil, and so forth with it. We can break up that hardscape. For example, if, a lot of times how driveways, there'll be a driveway here and one here, and then there's a little narrow planting strip. You can plant there, but use that inline drip line to irrigate that area. So we don't have to have those pop-up sprays that will definitely get oversprayed onto the concrete. You can also reduce these connected areas by the bottom left photo. This is decomposed granite and a planting area. And if you had, say, lawn on one side of this planting area and you were using sprinklers, by having this planting area here on the right, any overspray can go right into that area. The bottom right shows us some really beautiful natural stone steps. I will say that this will increase the cost of your project, but they are wonderful. In the middle, there's gravel so that the water can soak in there, and then there's another stairway. Continuing with hardscape, on the left photo, this is a concrete driveway, but the pavers that are used, the grout lines, that's what that's called, those lines around each paver, the water can actually soak down and around those pavers. So that's keeping that water on site soaking into the ground. One thing that I'll point out is if you have a need for a wheelchair or a walker, you want to be sure to get pavers and have pavement that is ADA approved by it's the Americans Disabilities Act. And that's why these pavers, they're spaced to a certain limitation, if you will, not big gaps and that sort of thing between them, so that walkers and wheelchairs can roll over them more comfortably. In the middle, we see some lighter gray concrete that is concrete and it just sheds the water, but it is very slightly sloped so it can drain into the landscaped area. The darker gray squares, those are actually, it's concrete, but the water can flow right through it. It is pervious, so the water just flows right through it. On the right-hand side, it's flagstone that you see. And instead of having concrete all around it, they have some pebbles. And so the water can soak into those areas very nicely. And I will say that flagstone comes in a lot of different colors. So you can get more of a tannish buff color, darker colors. They're not all this terracotta type color. Smaller pieces of flagstone are referred to as patio size. Larger ones like this are considered select. So they can be 2-3 feet tall and wide, really large. So store it. We are going to talk about how we can store our rainwater. This is my home, my landscape, when it was first started. I live up in Cool, but I work all over the Sacramento region. And so just as Brad Lancaster had said, we're going to start at the top. You know, we're going to look at where the solar panels are. That's where the rain's coming off. It's going into downspouts, and some of it flows into some swales across the property, and some of it I capture in rainwater tanks. And so with tanks, you can have above ground storage, below ground storage. There's a wide variety of capacity, how many gallons these storage tanks can hold. Then, of course, we think about the cost, what size, how are we using them, how are we connecting them, what's the cost of these various sizes. Can I pick it up or do I have to have it delivered? And who's going to install it? So those are some of the things to think about. In my mind, though, there's very little to be done once you have the tanks in. I'll talk about a few maintenance tips here, but let's first go with the location can be closer to walls and foundations, whereas the general rule of thumb for rain gardens is to have it about 10 feet away from your foundation. And also, the time that the water is in these storage tanks is much larger. So it's available for a longer period of time. Whereas when we were doing the contours, the swales and so forth, that water goes into those swales and it will soak into the ground, which is fabulous. I will say, you know, probably come spring where we're thinking we need to turn on the irrigation again, what I would suggest is dig down into the soil and see how deep the moisture is still there. Is just the top 2 or 3 inches dry? because you have a nice 3 or 4 inch layer of mulch on that. So you may be able to wait a little while before starting your irrigation up. Okay. So energy with tanks could be passive, whereas the water comes out by gravity, or like one of my tanks, I have a pump that I can drop down into it. The reason for that is because I have we have some maple trees that the original owner put in, and while they do require more water, they are also planted in full sun that they do not love. And so during the summer, I will take that water and I will spray them just as though it's a rain event. And I don't feel guilty about using the water, and they appreciate it. So here's our maintenance tips. Clean those gutters, those screens, downspouts. We'll talk about the screens more. Those, there's a debris excluder. We want to inspect and repair inlets, outlets, screens, and so forth. So let's talk about this. They're showing 2 rainwater tanks, right? Rain barrels, rather. And the water's coming down the downspout. On the top of the left one, you can see there's a screen. And the rule of thumb there is to use a 1/16 inch mesh. You really want the close mesh. And that way, we're not going to be giving a nice environment for mosquitoes or anything like that. And other creatures aren't getting in there. And so at the bottom left, you can see there is a spigot. And so that's where you can do the gravity feed of the water. In the upper right-hand side, you can see there's an overflow. So as these tanks fill up, then they have a way to go out into the landscaping. The right photo is a rain barrel at the Elk Grove Rain Garden. I encourage you to visit that rain garden. It's really wonderful. Here are some tanks. I say that there are tanks for every purpose and every space. And so we've got these tanks, and the ones on the right, as you can see those holes in there, those are to give that structure so that they're baffles. And so that when the water goes through and stores in there, and as it fills up, it's not pressing out to really cause that plastic material to bulge. So because we want to avoid that. And here is some more rainwater tanks. I wanted to mention to you that right here on the left-hand picture, right here on the downspout, that is called a leaf extruder, or what's another word? A leaf eater, I've heard it called. And so that is to keep debris out of there. And that's why on the tips that I spoke about, there is, you want to keep this, this leaf eater clean. And so it's actually, I've been asked about capturing rainwater. Is it not allowed in California? Because some states don't allow it in the United States. But actually, there was legislation passed in 2012 that paved the way for rainwater catchment to take place. And that was very important, but they put in some rules for us to follow. One being that leaf eater, and another being, you see the sign on the tank in the bottom right-hand side? If there is a spigot or a hose bib coming off of the rainwater tank, you need to have this sign that says non-potable water, do not drink, caution. Okay. So we can legally capture rainwater. I do advise that you check your local jurisdictions, find out if there are any specific guidelines that you are supposed to be complying with. So here are some tanks at my home. My house is on the side of a slope. And so I have deck all the way around my house. And so I said, well, let's just put the rainwater storage tanks under there. Nobody's going to see them. And that is the case. So I do have a handy dandy leaf eater that I am going to be putting on this downspout that's in the picture on the left. So that will go there. Then the downspout is coming down, going down underneath the deck and going into these tanks. The tank on the left is 1,100 gallons and the tank on the right is 750 gallons. And as I said, there's sizes for everybody and every need, all kinds of shapes and so forth. So just, think about where you might be able to tuck one. Not that big one, maybe. So how are we connecting multiple tanks if we want, just like we saw those two rain barrels connected? So on the right-hand side is a 550-gallon tank. And as you can see up here at the top, we have at the top, there is the overflow pipe that comes out and goes down and goes into a pipe at the bottom there. The other two pipes with those red handles, those are ball valves, whereas here's the pipe, here's the handle going across it like this. That means that it's closed. If I turn it and the ball valve handle is in line with the pipe, then it's open and that water can be flowing out. And so I have two of those. I might say this looks a little over-engineered to me, but okay. But it does the job. Then there's another downspout that leads to the tanks on the left. And if you look at the upper corner of this photo where there's a black tube coming in, so that's where it's coming from the downspout. And then you have that mesh screen all around it so no mosquitoes are getting in there. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because it's good for what's called the first flush. So when there is a rain event and we haven't had rain, for example, for a long time, or it could be all summer, then there could be moss on the roof or other debris and that sort of thing. And so we don't want that going into our tanks. So that is another level of care that we can give. So we're not getting debris and leaves and everything else in our water tanks, because this water, I mean, I value it like gold. And so I use it very wisely. But when we get our first rain event, you want to take that black tube out and let that water drain somewhere in your landscape. And the reason for that is it's called the first flush, and it will take that first flush of debris and other things that's off the roof and put it out where it can be cleansed in the soil in your landscape. Okay. And then you just put it back in there and you're ready to go again. Okay. All right. So here's a couple of examples. On the left is the City of Sacramento Department of Water Utilities. They have this fabulous garden that has these swales in it and all, a wonderful variety of native plants and plants that prefer our type of climate and conditions, often referred to as Mediterranean type. This water tank, I'm told, is 10,000 gallons. Wow. But it's doing the job. The one on the right, the landscape on the right, is designed by Soleil Tranquilli of Tranquil Gardens. And in the middle, which you don't even see, is a rain garden. And then if you look at the house in the upper right-hand corner, if you look at the house, there is just one section of a tank that you can see. And that's one of those tanks that's more narrow and it goes along the side of the house. And so, they're camouflaged very well. And you can be creative. I know people who paint like a plant and different things like that. So that's a lot of fun too. So we have resources, as I mentioned in the beginning. We will give you this handout with this resource and many others as well. And then I would like to just give you a call to action, if you will. As I've said, the reality is droughts are cyclical. They will happen again. We will have these dramatic changes in weather. And it's in our hands. We can employ these river-friendly landscaping and watershed approach practices to our landscapes, helping them to be more resilient and prepared to endure these future drought conditions, climate whiplash, etc. They are also helping us to keep that rainwater on our landscape, keep the pollutants out of our waterways. And then, of course, reducing the use of potable water. That is really key. And that is at the heart of this. Potable water is drinking water. So you've learned, and I've shared a number of options and strategies today. I hope you will give consideration to it and see which one or which ones you're able to implement. And so I encourage you to visit the Citrus Heights Water District website, learn about their programs, learn about their, such as the free WaterWise house calls, learn about their rebates and incentives, and of course, going to their YouTube website to watch the videos, this one and many others, okay? So I want to thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.